Pirates. The very word conjures up images of flamboyant captains and of seafaring treasure hunters, scouring the globe for gold and for glory. But what if I told you that the world's most notorious pirates operated more like the mafia than the pirates we're familiar with today? And what if I told you that these pirates were lying in wait for merchant ships in the Mediterranean rather than prowling the Caribbean for Spanish galleons? And what if I told you that these pirates weren't even after treasure, but people instead? Well, you'd be surprised to learn that all of that is true. Enter the Corsairs of the Barbary coast. Made up of the modern-day nations of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya, the Barbary states were the scourge of the Mediterranean. For centuries, these ruthless pirates captured European merchant ships and held the people for ransom. If the ransom was paid at a reported fixed rate of $4,000 per passenger, the hostages were released. If not, they were subjugated to a life of slavery among one of the 4 Barbary states. The Corsairs only targeted Christian ships, using passages from the Quran as justification for their actions. Because of this, they could be considered Muslim extremists. However, they were in it more for the money than religion. They simply used their religion to complement their greed. While the Corsairs of the Barbary coast continued to pillage and plunder, a new nation was being born across the Atlantic. The United States of America was fighting for its freedom against its old British rulers, and needed all the help it could get. In 1778, it allied itself with the French, who eventually went on to help the United States win the war. With their alliance, the French agreed to protect American ships entering the Mediterranean against the Barbary coast for the course of the war. For the British, now the Americans' enemies, were no longer going to do the job. It was even outlined in a treaty, the Treaty of Amity and Commerce. Article 8 specifically states that the French agree to protect the U.S. merchant ships from the King or Emperor of Morocco or Fez, the regencies of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, or with any of them, and also with every other prince, state, or power of the coast of Barbary in Africa. Unfortunately, as the war came to its inevitable conclusion, the French pulled away and left the U.S.'s ships to fend for themselves. The new country was navyless, so the ships were easy pickings for the experienced corsairs. The first act of piracy against the new nation came a mere 13 months after the United States had been officially recognized as a sovereign country. Moroccan pirates had seized the U.S. merchant ship Betsy on October 11, 1784 off the coast of Spain. Luckily for America, the Spanish government saw the crisis as the perfect opportunity to begin good relations with the United States, so they successfully negotiated the release of both the ship and the crew. They offered a bit of advice to the United States as well. The trick was to pay off the pirates so they wouldn't attack, essentially, pay tribute. The new government took the advice and sent Thomas Barclay to negotiate a treaty with the Moroccan Sultan, Sidi Muhammad. He succeeded, and a treaty was signed in 1786. However, the 3 other Barbary states paid no attention to such treaty, and 2 more American ships, the Maria and the Dauphine, were seized in 1785, just 6 days apart. And this time, Spain wasn't there to rescue them. The 2 crews of 21 men were taken by Algerian corsairs and enslaved. More attacks followed, and over 100 U.S. sailors were enslaved by the pirates. The U.S. government couldn't afford to keep paying so much tribute, but it was their only option, due to the fact that their navy was still non-existent. In 1795, 1796, and 1797, treaties were signed with Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis respectively. It wasn't enough to stop the attacks, however, and the U.S. continued to pour more and more money into tribute. In 1794 alone, over $1 million were paid to the Barbary states. By 1800, tribute to the pirates consumed 20% of the federal government's annual revenue. By today's standards, that's around $560 billion paid in tribute. Treaties were obviously not the answer. Thomas Jefferson, while in France, had predicted this. He frequently spoke out against the tribute and stated that it only encouraged the corsairs to continue assaulting U.S. ships. In a letter to Thomas Barclay in 1791, Jefferson wrote that he would prefer war in all cases to tribute under any form and to any people. When he ascended the presidency, he put this attitude into action. When the Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Koramanli, approached Jefferson asking for $225,000 in tribute in May of 1801, Jefferson refused. Outraged, Yusuf had the flagpole of the U.S. consulate in Tripoli cut. This tradition was Tripoli's official way of declaring war. In response, Jefferson sent the 6 ships of the U.S. Navy created by Adams in 1794 to Tripoli with orders to protect our commerce against a threatened attack. Once the ships arrived, they quickly achieved their first victory. The USS Enterprise was able to defeat the Corsair ship at Tripoli in a pitched battle on August 1st. The ship soon set up patrols and remained unchallenged at sea for over a year. Disaster struck in October of 1803, however, when the USS Philadelphia was captured by the Corsairs and used as a gun battery. In a daring act, Lieutenant Stephen Decatur and a small force of U.S. Marines were able to board the captured ship, overpower the guards in hand-to-hand combat, and set fire to the USS Philadelphia, denying it use to the enemy. Famous British Admiral Horatio Nelson called it the most bold and daring act of the age. Multiple attacks on Tripoli were inconclusive at best, and it wasn't until 1805 that the turning point came. A small land force of 500 U.S. Marines and mercenaries were able to capture the Tripolitan city of Derna. This was the first time the U.S. had ever raised their flag on foreign soil. The capture of Derna, coupled with the increased U.S. naval pressure, forced Yusuf into negotiating a treaty with the Americans, ending the war on June 4th, 1805. While it would take another 10 years to finally end the plague of the remaining 2 Barbary states of Algiers and Tunis, the First Barbary War, as it came to be called, had a number of important consequences. For one, it established the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marines as capable fighting forces. The Marines even immortalized their victory at Derna in their Marine hymn, with the lyric, "To the shores of Tripoli." The reason Marine officers nowadays wear Mameluke swords is because it was a Mameluke sword that was presented to the U.S. upon their victory. The name Leathernecks also comes to us from the First Barbary War. For Marines wore long leather neck guards to protect their necks from the slashing of the pirates' cutlasses. The First Barbary War also established the U.S. as an important international player and showed that it would stand up for itself. The U.S. was also the first nation to stand up to the Barbary states, an act which the nations of Europe would soon follow. The consequences of the war reach further still and affect us even today in the modern era. The First Barbary War and the events leading up to it was the U.S.'s first foreign action against what one could call Muslim extremists. It was the first time the U.S. went to war with a foreign power to protect the rights of its citizens, and it was the first time the U.S. set the precedent that the United States does not negotiate with terrorists. America learned from experience that diplomacy and negotiation does not work, for they tried many times to use it with the Barbary states. As General William Eaton put it, there is but one language which can be held to these people, and this is terror. The First Barbary War directly parallels the war in Afghanistan and the war on terror today for multiple reasons. One, it is in response to an act of terror against the United States. Two, it is against Muslim extremists targeting specific people. And three, they both follow the precedent of no negotiation with terrorism. The First Barbary War set the stage for all future U.S. policy on terrorism, and for that reason, it could be called the United States' First War on Terror.